Amy from Following Hawks, and welcome back. Or if you're new here, I share all about working with the spirits of the land and the energies of the earth. In my last few videos, I've been sharing more about the electroculture experiments that I've been doing, and while the topic interests me in general, there's actually something behind that that has really sparked my interest in this topic, and I wanted to share more about that with you today. Now, I've been tripping over bits and pieces of this information probably for the past year or so, but it really all came together for me when I found the book Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty. Now, the authors of the book were working on a project back in the 90s to treat seeds with electromagnetic energy. They were finding that when seeds were exposed to a highly specialized shower of electrons, that they were much more productive. The seeds would germinate earlier and grow faster, they would produce far more food, and they were able to withstand all kinds of stress, all without the use of chemicals or fertilizers. And while they were continuing doing research on this project, they stumbled across another bit of information that they found really interesting. The possibility that the heightened energy at ancient monuments and sacred sites may have been harnessed specifically to create these electromagnetic conditions for improved farming and growing conditions. Now, after they did years of research and travels, this seems to be true. Some of these incredibly impressive monuments at energetic hotspots around the world were in fact temples to the sun and the earth. But the reason may have been to harness these energies in order to grow food. They were ancient electroculture temples. Now, this may sound a bit simplistic to us today. I mean, why would these people in ancient times have gone to all of this trouble to energize seeds or their fields? Well, if you can't feed your community, you're not going to be a community for very long. And as the authors point out, in our culture today, we go to great lengths to build things like hydroelectric dams to provide electricity to our cities. And why do we do that? Because we consider electricity that important to our culture, so it's worth the time and the effort. But thousands of years ago, growing food wouldn't have just been integral to the survival of a community. If you could grow more food with the same number of seeds, it would have meant you'd have more to put away for the future, for lean times, or to be able to trade with people from other locations who maybe didn't have an agricultural temple of their own. So what were the elements that these temples needed in order to be successful? First of all, ancient people needed to find a location where the local geology enhances the Earth's electromagnetic fields. In the hours leading up to dawn every day, the magnetic field of the Earth strengthens, creating a DC current in the ground. These are called telluric currents, and they travel easier through some types of ground than others. Any ground with lots of metal or water in it will conduct the energy more easily. Dried or less metallic earth doesn't conduct it as well. Wherever these two types of land meet, the wetter or more metallic land with the drier, less metallic land, something very interesting happens. When the ground current hits these boundaries, it will either strengthen or weaken the magnetic fluctuations, sometimes by a huge percentage. This then generates even more electric current. So as you might imagine, the vibes emanating from these particular locations on Earth are incredibly heightened. And if you're sensitive to energy, you are definitely going to feel it. But the other interesting thing that happens in these locations is that the ground currents will attract electrified molecules of the opposite sign. So a positive electrical current in the ground will attract a negative molecule in the air. And what does that mean? More moisture, more water, more rain. And if these geologic areas happen to be on an island or a peninsula, the effects are magnified to an even greater effect. Isn't this so fascinating? So in the author's research, they found again and again that the ancient temple builders repeatedly selected these geologic hotspots for their sacred sites. What's even more interesting is that these telluric currents only travel in the top 3 feet of the ground. So if you cut a 3-foot ditch in the ground, it not only stops the electrical current from moving through the ground, but it pools it in that location. And if you look to Europe, you'll see that the henges are built this way, like Stonehenge. They're essentially C-shaped ditches built 3 feet into the ground. This would ensure that the already heightened electrical energies concentrated in one particular location. Now, mounds and pyramids are also great attractors for electromagnetic charges, because any buildup of electricity in the air will start looking for the shortest route to the ground, or to the opposite electrical charge. This is why trees and tall buildings are often struck by lightning. They're all the way up in the air, in that negatively charged air, with a concentration of positive coming from the earth. And then the negatively charged ions in the clouds reach out to the positively charged tree, and oftentimes a lightning strike happens. But there's not always a lightning strike. Often the air is just ionized or energized between these two molecules, and we don't really see it with our human eyes. That means if you build a mound made of earth in an energetically charged location and make it high enough and narrow enough to attract these negative electrons without causing a lightning strike, you would create a massive concentration of electromagnetic energy in this particular spot. Pretty cool, right? And the author spent years traveling around the world to all of these different sites and bringing seeds with them. All kinds of seeds, many of which were very old or degraded seeds, or seeds that would have been used by ancient people in a particular area. And they would just place them in or on the temples and then take them back home and see what happened. And they would compare them to seeds that were left in their lab back at home, or even just left in their car in the parking lot near the ancient site. And again, they found that these seeds that were exposed to these electromagnetic hotspots would germinate faster, grow faster, be ready for harvest sooner, and grow far more food than any of the other seeds they compared. The same results that they were getting with their highly technical equipment that they built in their lab. So where can you find these locations? Some of them won't surprise you, of course. The henges across Europe, the Great Pyramids of Egypt, and the Irish Round Towers, which I shared about in my last video. But also Tikal, the first city of the great Mayan civilization in Guatemala. Also the modern-day village of Chauvin and Lake Titicaca in Peru. Now, if you live in North America, you might be surprised at how close you actually live to one of these sacred sites. In fact, 2/3 of the U.S. population lives within a couple-hour driving distance of one of these locations. There's mysterious pre-Columbian rock chambers all over New England. And while these rock chambers are slightly different from the large stone temples found in other parts of the world, the results that the authors got were very similar, and they seem to create the same electromagnetic anomalies. These chambers are kind of beehive shaped, a little bit like an igloo made out of stone, but with a flat top. And they were all built in areas with magnetite in the ground, and that's a magnetic form of iron. And what they found was that the air inside these chambers was very electrically charged. Something about the specific elements used in these structures causes the air molecules to be charged in an opposite way from a typical fair weather day. They're charged more like they would be when a thunderstorm would be rolling through. Now, the most famous group of these rock chambers is at Mystery Hill, often called America's Stonehenge. And it's in New Salem, New Hampshire. And some historians have noted that these chambers are remarkably similar to dolmens that were built all over Europe over a 6,000-year time period. And they can be found all over the UK, France, Spain, Portugal, and as far east as India. Now, maybe more famously in the United States, there's also the ancient mound sites. And as it turns out, every single one that's more than 6 feet high was placed on a magnetic anomaly on the ground. The dirt was mounded in long ridges along the energetic hotspots. In Chillicothe, Ohio, the largest one is even surrounded by a C-shaped ditch. Cahokia, Illinois is known for its giant flat-topped pyramid, and at one point, 30,000 people lived in this community. The community was known for not only its wealth, but also its remarkable agriculture. Now, there's Serpent Mound in Ohio, which is built on a bluff that juts out like a peninsula. It's flanked by 2 streams and is on top of solid dolomite, a particularly electrically conductive form of limestone. Ultimately, 383 villages were built along the Mississippi River, and most of the mounds were built not with local soil, but with clay that had to be brought in from further distances away. And as I shared in the last video, once clay dries, it does become magnetic. So what's interesting about the mounds is that the experiments that the authors did with them didn't find a huge amount of difference between their control seeds until they had seeds there during a thunderstorm. And then the results were very similar to the other electromagnetically charged locations. Ultimately, there seemed to be a very important purpose outside of simply ritual or ceremony happening in these structures. Although I have no doubt that each community would have had their own special ceremonies or rituals in order to bring the seed to these locations. I think it gives us a whole different view of our ancient ancestors and what they found to be important to them, and how they provided for themselves and for their families. Not to mention what they held sacred. The ability to grow food for themselves and their community wasn't just a practical chore. It was an integral part of their spiritual connection with the earth, the sun, the water, and the abundance that could be provided when they worked in harmony and honored these energies. It was a balanced give and take. The seeds were offered to the earth, and in return, the plants grew to nourish the people. Of course, that would be worthy of ceremony and ritual. And if you didn't live within close proximity of a temple, of course it would have been worthy of a pilgrimage to this location every spring ahead of planting season. Generations of people year after year walking back and forth the same trails to the same temples to ensure their collective survival for another year. Now, there's far more research included in this book that I can't even begin to cover here. So if you're interested in diving more into the history of these temples or the science that was done with all of this research, definitely go read the book. It's out of print, but it is available online and on Kindle, and I'll include a link down in the description below. So what do you think? Do you live close enough to a sacred site to take some seeds there and see what happens for yourself? Let me know down in the comments if you're planning on visiting a site or if you've been to one of these locations before. And be sure to check out my past videos on electroculture. In the meanwhile, I hope that you have a magical week, my friends.